I have gone way, way too far. Time to back up, turn around, pack your bags. We got to go back. MythVision has spent several years trying to put the Bible in its cultural historical context, meaning, what did the text mean by the authors who wrote them in the first place? And how do I understand what it's doing? I found similarities in genre and mythology and legend and narrative and history and things that make me go, that's very similar to what I see over here, at the same period in time, or at least is influential in that period of time, even if it was written much earlier by the culture in which this material was birthed. And I think I've gone too far. I've gone way too far trying to compare Jesus to Dionysus, for example, in the Gospel of John, with turning water into wine. Even though Dionysus has turned milk into wine, water into wine, there are several myths of Dionysus, and that even though Dionysus was an extremely, extremely popular deity figure at this time, even in the first century in the Greco-Roman world. And why would the author craft a narrative of him turning these objects of water into wine at the hands of Jesus? I mean, in that same gospel, you have Jesus saying, I am the true vine. Or, chew my flesh, eat my flesh, drink my blood. Similar things we find with the Titans grinding Dionysus in their teeth, and this ritual act of ingesting the deity that we find so common and prevalent, well established in the cults, the mystery cults of the Greco-Roman world at the time. And I thought, well, maybe the author's trying to pull in these Gentiles and incorporate these non-Jews who are well acquainted with these myths by making Jesus better. How wrong of me to even try to do something like that. Hear what I'm trying to say. Follow along. The people who believe that literally happened with Jesus, but don't believe that happened with Dionysus, if Dionysus even existed. The people who think Jesus was born of a virgin in a long line of Greco-Roman divine birth narratives, and of course, it's not just Greco-Roman, but we're dealing with the Greek and Roman world here in which Christianity is birthed, where gods impregnate women. They got to make this one special, of course, and show you that actually this virgin birth is unique, even though Plutarch mentions Plato having a divine birth at the dynamos, the power, and pneuma, spirit of God, impregnating Plato's mother. This is in Plutarch. Similar language we find in Luke, exact same Greek words, dynamos and pneuma, for the birth of Jesus. Stop that, Derek. I'm guilty already. But I'm trying to paint you an example. Okay, so please forgive me in advance. The people who believe that literally happened with Jesus, but don't believe that Plato's, or the list can go on of demigod, heroes, gods, whatever, with their births, those didn't happen. The people who believe that Jesus had this extreme knowledge at a very young age, or walked on water, multiplied the fish and loaves, cast out the demons, healed the blind, the lame, the sick, raised the dead, died himself, rose again from the dead, floated up into heaven on a cloud. Those guys, people who do interviews with exorcists who say that humans are crawling up the walls, demon-possessed people are crawling up the walls, they go even further, and they'll go to literature to say, actually, guess what? It wasn't just Jesus being born of a virgin. Mary had an immaculate conception. So they go a little bit further. These people who believe that the prison breaks in Acts, or some of the apostles are stoned to death and then they're resurrected, handkerchiefs are healing people, just sending their handkerchiefs everywhere, or that Peter's having visions that just so happen to coincide with Paul's letters pertaining to how to sit with Gentiles, and that these unclean meals you can eat with the Gentiles. The list can go on things we can try and do. They believe those things are true. Those people are starting to get to me. They're starting to become persuasive because they're teaching me how to turn my brain off. They're the ones encouraging me to go back pack up your bags, quit trying to place this material in its cultural historical context and find genre and myth and whatnot that has comparisons. Quit doing that. Let me give you an example in the Gospel of Luke with Jesus on the road to Emmaus. I want to do this with Joseph in the Old Testament, and I want to do this with the theophany myth that we see here in Luke. Sorry, I think I just slipped up and called it a myth. I meant the story that literally happened in Luke, and I want to tell you about the stories that didn't happen with the Odyssey, and then the one that really happened with Joseph in the Old Testament as well. So the Odyssey, you have Odysseus. He goes off to Troy to fight. Then he has this long journey and wanders and whatnot, gets back. Athena changes his identity. He's engaging with his family, and classicists for a long time have recognized this is mythology, a legend. It is a story. This did not happen, literally. So he ends up showing up and he's playing with his own family. He's toying with Penelope. He's toying with his own son. His son Argo dies because he recognizes his master and he realizes, oh crap, you have Eurycleia, the one who suckled him as a child, washing his feet, similar to a recognition scene that we see with a woman who recognizes Jesus as the Messiah washing his feet. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this is really cool. Then eventually, with all the emotions involved, reveals his identity. Kind of like you see with Jesus tiptoeing around the apostles, hiding his true identity, and eventually reveals his identity in the Gospel of Mark. Who do men say that I am? He's toying with them. You, the reader, know, though, who they are. And then you get to Joseph. Joseph gets killed, according to his father, by a wild beast, and they have his coat of many colors, and the brothers are really in on it. The brothers go to Egypt to get food because of a famine, and what do they find out? Well, there's food in Egypt. They don't know that it's their brother. And Joseph is toying with them, tormenting them, technically. In the end, daddy comes from this land in Canaan, and here they are in Egypt. And what's he do? Finally, the emotions burst forward, and he reveals his identity. Here's what those people who think demons are crawling up the wall, Jesus was born of a real virgin, rose from the dead, and ascended into heaven are telling me. Derek, the Bible one happened. This is history. This really happened. The Odyssey? Bullshit. That ain't true. That didn't happen. That is myth. And then I read Bruce Loudon, who says that actually that myth is in the Bible, and those stories are myth. Exodus, Joseph's story, Jacob and Esau, Adam and Eve, Abraham, you name it. All these have very interesting antecedents and comparisons. You can go to other mythologies that it walks and talks and looks very much like it. For example, the Akedah that we look at with Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Holy smokes. Well, we see a similar thing with a king named Athamos and his new wife, Ino. I think it's his new wife, or that was his first wife. Either way, the stepmom is not a fan of the kids. Phrixus and Helenus. Forgive me if I don't have the names correct. He goes and Apollo, supposedly through the oracle at Delphi, instructs that he sacrifices his children to Apollo. He goes to do it, and at the last second, a flying golden fleeced ram saves the children, Phrixus and Helle. Helle falls into the water, and at this point to this day, they call that region of the water Hellespont. Phrixus survives, and eventually, in a thanksgiving to Apollo for saving him, sacrifices the ram and hangs the golden fleece on a tree. In the Abraham myth, he goes to sacrifice, an angel appears. There's a ram that's stuck in a thicket, in a bush or a tree, and there's no golden fleece. I get it. There's no identical mythology here, but very similar motifs. And I ask myself, did the biblical account get influence from the ancient Argonaut myth of the golden fleece and such? Did the ancient Greeks get influenced by earlier Phoenician, earlier Mesopotamian mythologies that helped them craft these stories? Is there some common ground, common antecedent? How did they get these influences? Because I do think there's something there. Well, those who tell us to shut our brains off, who are persuading me at this point, are telling me, nope, Abraham's happened. But that Argonaut golden fleece bullshit, kick the can, baby. Go down the road. You ain't real. That didn't happen. So I go, oh my God, where do I go from here? I mean, I'm reading about the conquest of Canaan. I find like it's Tukulti Ninurta the first in 13th century. You see an Assyrian king doing conquest, kind of like what the Canaan conquest was with Joshua. Very, very similar. The other people, they're demonized in the literature. The god Asser commands them to go and kill and annihilate them and conquer their land. But the biblical text talks about this kind of conquest. And because the Bible says Yahweh tells the Israelites to go because of these atrocities and evils that the Canaanites did, that they have the right to take their land. And that's totally okay. You just listen to William Lane Craig. Take the time to listen to that guy. He knows what he's talking about. But the other examples that you can find of historical events like this happening, and by the way, archaeology doesn't even support that the narrative happened in the Canaanite situation. There might be one site that's debatable about the data, but even then it's continued Canaanite religion. So it's not even what we read of in the biblical text of what the religion should be. Kind of odd. So what are we doing with thinking this is historical? Well, as far as archaeologists go, they can suck one, because guess what? Those who tell us to turn our brain off, they're the ones who say, I don't care. This happened. The Bible says so. You could do this with tons and tons of stories. Samson compared to Heracles or Gilgamesh or any of these kind. Stop that. Samson happened. No matter what kind of genre. So back to when I was telling you I was going to get into Luke, Jesus appears on the road to Emmaus, similar to how there are stories about Caesars appearing on roads, Roman roads to people, and the eyewitnesses who come back and report these things. This is documented. Justin Martyr talks about this in his apologies, the apology, first apology. And I'm sitting here reading this going, oh my gosh, they don't know it's Jesus that's walking with them. What's happened? Are you the only Jew in all of Israel that doesn't know that Jesus was crucified? You know the story. And then eventually they invite him in, and then they break bread, and next thing you know, they knew it was him. It was Jesus. So they go all the way back that night to go tell everyone, it was him. He appeared to us. Very similar delayed recognition, theoxany that you might find with other myths. In Ovid's Metamorphosis, Ovid's Fasti, myths that you would find in the Odyssey. But those are myths, and those didn't happen. This myth happened. Yeah, just chant it till your brain shuts off. Chant it till you believe it. Let's do it together. Let's brainwash ourselves together. That's why I said I've gone too far. I have gone way too far trying to situate and recognize what it seems to be so obvious. But the only reason I would do that is I want to sin. It isn't that I want to know what the historical facts are, what the literary reality is, what the genre of this stuff is. Even though there is massive freedom in one's own mind and recognizing we're dealing with stories that are crafted and did not happen as they are written. They're stories. But when you get to the Bible, that one happened. Doesn't matter about all the other genres that it looks like and talks like and acts like, and screw all that. Who cares? I mean, inspiring philosophy tells you otherwise. It doesn't matter if all of this is fiction and it walks like fiction, talks like fiction, looks like fiction, acts like fiction. And if you're going to talk about prior probabilities because you see examples of fiction endlessly occurring here, this one happened. So I just got to start taking in what inspiring philosophy is telling me. And Cameron Batuzzi with the demons crawling up the wall stuff. I got to start thinking these stories about Jesus happened. Quit trying to categorize this stuff and look at it in its original context. Quit trying to make sense of things. Derek, how dare you? Why would you dare try to do such a thing? So I'm confessing. I've gone too far. I have gone way too far in recognizing that all of this stuff is loaded with legend mythology sprinkled with verisimilitude, some history that it might be there throughout these texts, but oftentimes, way more often than not, propagandistic narratives written to, in so many different ways, to encourage you to believe these things, with the Judeans in mind as usurping the northern kingdom and being the primary place of worship in Jerusalem. So many things. We got to cut out all those Yahweh cults. Ours is the one. The list can go on and on. And just because I could find the mythology of El and Ugarit and Asherah, and the evidence is overwhelming that Israelites worshipped and practiced these kinds of practices from child sacrifice, the human sacrifice, as we've seen quotes about Phoenicians doing. And just because I could find that El had a wife and several kids and elements in the Bible that hint at polytheistic tendencies and stuff, doesn't mean those scholars who say those things are on the right track. Oh, we got to mention Francesca Stavrokopoulou for a second here. How dare her try to compare the mythology of the Bible? Change my vocabulary here. To compare the historical reality of Yahweh and the biblical text of the true one God, that no other gods are true and there are no other gods besides him, to the ancient Near Eastern stuff that's in Egyptian mythology, Mesopotamian mythology, Ugarit, Phoenician, Canaanite, the whole nine, and this region, Hittite, the list goes on and on. How dare her try to recognize the sexual elements of these deities, which have been, for millennia about these deities. What is her problem? How dare her try to situate Yahweh and this God El and El Shaddai and try to contextualize this in an ancient Near Eastern context? She really likes to sexualize this stuff, doesn't she? Those other Christians that are antagonistic to her work, who get so triggered and butthurt because people actually love finding out what's behind the curtain, what we've been not being told by those who believe Jesus was born of a virgin and actually rose from the dead, walked on water, multiplied the fish and the loaves, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Actually, you know what? Actually, I'm not going to turn around. I think those people are full of shit. And I you know what? Now I realize in this conversation that I think I'm going to keep my pursuit of truth and April Fools, because in order to persuade me, as I've said before, that any of these actually happened, you're not going to do it with a damn book. There is no way possible in this ancient text loaded with mythology and legend and issues amongst itself. There is no way possible you can persuade me that route. It is going to take, if there really is, divine intervention. And if God can reveal himself, or Jesus, whom Christians think are God in the flesh, that's a whole nother rabbit trail about divinities, and there's a higher ultimate father and all this stuff, and Jesus was a God. I do think the New Testament shows this, that he is a God, but not the ultimate father God. And then you have this anachronistic Trinitarian stuff that is trying to make sense of all this material. Either way, don't want to go down that path. The point is like all of that and recognizing what's going on in the New Testament. You're going to need that God who can reveal himself to Thomas, who doubted, to also reveal himself to me. And I think that any Christian who's sincere about truth and wanting to know the truth and says to themselves, I'm not afraid of where the truth takes me because the truth will set you free. They have this philosophy of, I want the truth. That's what I had, and that's what led me to where I am. Thankfully, I kept that. And that's what I was jokingly making this video about, to show you that I want the truth. And at the end of the day, if they want the truth, and you read the narratives of the New Testament, truth as in what is reality, what actually is the case, what is it? Then you see a doubting tradition throughout the Gospels and needing that to be overcome. That doubt needs to be overcome by those who were the closest to the scene of supposedly the things that are reported to have happened, according to the literary text that we read. And if those people there doubted, how much more should you, thousands of years removed, doubt that this stuff happened? No, Christians want you to turn the brain off and just believe. And I'm not just saying Christians do that. Muslims do it for Islam. Jews do it with Judaism, many who are more like strict about it. The list can go on and on. That being said, I hope you have a wonderful April Fool's, April 1st, and I won't be turning my brain off. I just want you to keep joining me on the journey, and I hope you enjoyed this off-the-cuff, hip-fire, just having fun, throwing out where I'm at, what I'm doing, and I hope you are too. Love y'all.